Our top story right now is about political violence and accountability. We have these mounting threats here at home. Consider just what we know right now. The FBI warning that domestic white supremacists are now the top threat to Americans. We know about the violent insurrection that literally tried to overthrow the federal government. And we know many Republican leaders openly minimize or defend the violence of that infamous day, even as some of its most visible participants are convicted and go to jail for years, including the sentence of the so-called QAnon shaman today. We also know militias and right-wing activists are trying to act on many different types of calls for violence. There was a busted plot to bomb Democratic Party offices in California. There was another busted plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan. All 5 people there indicted for that await trial for what prosecutors say is a serious crime. Why am I mentioning this all to you right now? Because it's serious when a sitting member of Congress releases a murder fantasy video. We're not showing the video, but it came out, and these are stills from it, that depict the killing of another fellow member of Congress. That matters. It is exactly the kind of act which so many would-be criminals have been taking as inspiration for reality-based violence in politics recently. And it raises the question, what will be done to stop this before things get even worse? Well, this is the news, and we actually have an answer for you on this one. Today, the House of Representatives answered that question. It took a formal step against one of its own, which is actually quite rare. The United States House censuring Republican Representative Paul Gosar for the violent video that I just mentioned. The nonpartisan outlet that covers Congress, C-SPAN, reported the news in its characteristically dry fashion.
He may be censured over posting an animated video of himself killing Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York and attacking President Biden with swords in the video.
Yes, attacking the president with weapons, killing another member of Congress. That's not C-SPAN's usual topic, but they gave it their usual dry distillation. C-SPAN typically broadcasts the routine hearings of Congress, the seemingly endless floor speeches. It doesn't have to usually broadcast what Congress does when one of its own lawmakers publicly imagines murdering a colleague. Today's debate and vote was not business as usual, and it can't be lost on the members there that it occurred inside of a year from the illegal political violence which turned that very congressional floor into a crime scene as violent right-wing self-anointed Trump fans, MAGA advocates in their red hats, bashed down doors and attacked police and advocated for the murder of, among others, the vice president. They took the calls to fight and overthrow and kill officials quite literally. They did their best. They committed many crimes. That's a legal fact. So all of that is the context for today's action. The debate on the floor ranged from many Democrats looking quite genuinely outraged and concerned to quite a few Republicans minimizing that kill video as just some kind of fun gag or cartoon.
These actions demand a response. We cannot have a member joking about murdering each other or threatening the President of the United States.
For Democrats, this vote isn't about a video, it's about control. We're critiquing Paul Gosar's anime. Next week, we might be indicting the Wile E. Coyote.
Every time we've seen a new low in conduct from our colleagues across the aisle, we get crickets or excuses.
Do you have no shame?
If I must join Alexander Hamilton, the first person attempted to be censored by this House, so be it.
And Mr. Gosar, you are no Alexander Hamilton. You must be held accountable.
You heard it there. Congressman Gosar refusing to take responsibility or apology of any kind offered. Instead, Congressman likens his censure to Hamilton, who the Congress did censure over allegations regarding how he handled funds at the Treasury Department. The comparison is especially odd because Hamilton engaged in a lawless duel that famously resulted in his own death. He was killed in that duel. It's one of the most prominent examples of political violence run amok in the founding era. Now, it's not clear if Gosar realizes the irony or idiocy of the comparison, and it doesn't matter much if he does. What matters is that the Congress and the public in our democracy realize all of this, what we're facing. The political violence is real. It has plagued America and many other countries. And it tends to spike in periods where there is intense or reckless polarization, and often in conjunction with clashes in America over racism and civil rights. So where are we right now? We're facing both of those kind of challenges in our polity, in our body politic. And the polarization is not always two-sided. Today, it was really on display among Republicans who stuck with Gosar on the vote. 99% of House Republicans backed him and voted against censure. Only 2 voted to censure him. But the Republicans backing Gosar, they lost today. Congress voted for its first censure of a sitting member in a decade and took away his power in office, booting him off his 2 committees. And that's some of the only ways members wield power and win individual things for their home district. House members really have struggled to overcome losing that committee power. This is what happened to Steve King in 2019 as punishment after he voiced controversial public support for white supremacy. So he was booted off his committees. He lost his very next race. He lost the primary to a Republican who argued, among other things, that the Congressman King was now unable to deliver for his district like any other congressperson without committee power. King now is an ex-House member. Gosar might learn something from that recent history, or like Hamilton, let's be clear, it's not all that evident how good Congressman Gosar is at history. But today's vote does show accountability in action. The Republican caucus's support for Gosar may be telling, may be important, may be something for people to consider, but when it comes to the news tonight and what happened, it is literally governmentally irrelevant to the outcome. It was just the losing side of the power exercise today, power that those Republicans don't wield. The winning side, with the action taken by Congress, which, as I'm reminding you, is pretty rare, it draws a line to punish and deter further violent talk or content or fantasy or inspiration that people can clearly take literally. One of the officials targeted in the video, AOC, came to the floor and asked a question that really wasn't about left or right, didn't seem to be about scoring points, and I want you to hear it. It was about asking how modern American Republicans have reached a point, as demonstrated by their chosen leaders, where even apart from the censure question, which you could argue is a kind of domestic, inter-congressional policy, before you get to censure, how did the Republicans get to the point where they won't even say it's wrong in public to traffic in depictions of political assassination?
It is a sad day in which a member who leads a political party in the United States of America cannot bring themselves to say that issuing a depiction of murdering a member of Congress is wrong. What is so hard? What is so hard about saying that this is wrong?
Turning to imminent news on a story we have been reporting for you here on The Beat, the case of a death row inmate, Julius Jones, has now reached what looks like a final chapter. He is awaiting execution tomorrow in Oklahoma. Now, the parole board did recommend clemency for Jones, meaning recommending he not be executed. He was originally convicted of murdering Paul Howell, a 45-year-old businessman, 20 years ago. Jones has maintained his innocence since he's been in prison.
I am here before you today to tell you what I never got to tell the jury in my trial. Yes, I've made many mistakes in my youth, but I did not kill Mr. Paul Howell.
There is a lot of evidence for that claim. Students in Oklahoma walked out in protest to the execution. Jones' lawyers say it was not a fair trial. A juror in the trial says another juror used a racist slur to describe Jones, a claim that we reported on The Beat. Here is how a member of this majority-white Oklahoma jury later, after the conviction, recounted what a juror said.
One of the jurors said, well, they should just take this out back, shoot him and bury him under the jail. Didn't matter what happened. This was a black man that was on trial for murder.
As for Oklahoma, well, they support their death penalty down there, but even they had to stop it for years. It's only resuming now, as I mentioned, because it's sort of notorious for these problems, notorious for botching executions. That is just part of our original report on this. I show that to mention that this news outlet and many others and many local reporters have shined a light. This is not brand new, although it's imminent with the execution scheduled tomorrow. But the fact that the execution is based on a conviction that involved jurors using the N-word and saying the facts didn't matter and advocating a lynching is suspect, to say the least. Now, this trial and its problems have gotten a lot of attention. Take Kim Kardashian, who has 70 million followers. She's pushed out today a critique of how it shows how the death penalty really works. The family of Julius Jones was camped out steps away from the officer of the governor there, asking for mercy. Now, the governor's office has said he is considering what is a rare request for clemency by the parole board, but as of this hour, no action has been taken. We will continue to cover this story for you, which is a reminder of how the death penalty often does work in America. There is light at the end of the tunnel. That's what health experts are saying tonight. Dr. Fauci noting by next year, COVID may no longer be dominating if vaccination continues. The FDA also approving booster shots for all adults as soon as this week. Thanksgiving on track to be the busiest holiday travel weekend in 2 years. Another sign of change. United saying December looks to be the busiest flying month in 2 years. And what's more iconic than New Year's Eve in Times Square? Well, New York City reopening the famed venue for the vaccinated this New Year's Eve. All of this is happening, and while there still is COVID in America, still many problems with it, of course, and larger questions about how we come out of this pandemic. People like Jeff Bezos reaping huge profits while workers continue to face many challenges. And then there's just what we come back to. Remote work is sparking new and fairly uncharted debates about what is fair for everyone. Now, novelist Gary Steingart, who is a friend of the beat, actually has a new novel where his character rides out the pandemic safely from a country home, but harbors guilt for fellow workers stuck at his own uncle's restaurant. The novel asks, why was he here? Why were his co-workers there? He also writes of the way the pandemic taps into ongoing racism in America. One scene depicts basically a discrimination against Asian Americans, and a woman concerned about that in the novel says she feels like some Americans view her as a, quote, double threat in the eyes of, in that scene, a homicidal motorist. It is a reminder that the pandemic has uncorked many things, including new art, and we're now joined by Gary Steingart with the bookshelf naturally behind him. He is the author of books you might know, like Absurdistan and Super Sad True Love Story, a finalist for the National Books Critics Award in 2014. And as for the new one, Gary, well, the New York Times says your pandemic novel is your finest yet. End quote.
Wow.
Fact check true?
Let's hope so. Yeah, this was, there you go. I got one too.
Wait, do you want to do it at the same time? Here.
Let's do it at the same time. Oh my goodness. Look at this in stereo sound. Yeah. I was up here in March. I live mostly up in the country now. And everyone around me was baking bread, but I don't know how to bake bread. So I decided to write this book instead.
Got to do something. How do you feel about channeling an experience that's clearly not over and then publishing this? Does that feel different to you than some of your books that have written about your own childhood or much more distant events?
Sure. I mean, I wrote a novel called Super Sad True Love Story, which was a dystopia set in the future. But nowadays, the dystopia is in the present. So as somebody who's a satirist, I really don't have to look very far. As I started writing this book, the pandemic was just starting, but also the Trump administration was going full tilt. And as someone who came from a failing superpower, I was born in the Soviet Union, this felt very familiar to me, this combination of incompetence and gross negligence. So it was a kind of Chernobyl moment for me.
What's the funniest thing about the pandemic?
There was nothing funny about the pandemic except for the fact that one restaurant near us was very known for its hand sanitizer. They had such a beautiful hand sanitizer that people started flocking to it, and that made its way in the book. There was nothing really funny about it, obviously, when you consider the toll it took on so much of the population. And the characters, as you mentioned in the book, are constantly looking back 100 miles south down to New York, because many of them, the characters, are immigrants from Russia, like myself, Korea, India, and many of them have roots in places like Elmhurst and Jackson Heights that bore a lot of the brunt of the pandemic. So many people Obviously, first responders lived in those neighborhoods and many of them perished. So the book is not, I mean, the book is still comedic, but, comedy is just how I deliver the tragedy. It's the ICBM missile and the payload is the tragedy.
Well, isn't comedy just tragedy plus time?
Yes, but here the time is only 3 months, so I'm really sorry about
not
that.
a lot of time. I'm also curious about the stress test you mentioned, and you've written about a quasi-failed state, or at least as far as democracy is concerned in Russia, and pandemic immediately made everyone say, oh, are we going to change, or what are we going to do with this? And it's a complex story, to be sure, but a lot of what that stress test revealed was what you write about in the book, the underlying problems, inequity, racism, who bears the brunt of any crisis in American capitalism. It was almost like the bad things were just worse. How does that square for you in telling a story that has to have some uplift or change or growth? Because people don't just want to read cold winter Russian novels, man.
Well, what I decided to do was I decided to have all of those things be in the background of the book, for sure. I mean, when the Floyd murder takes place, everyone in this little group of people hunkering down upstate, everyone notices this. And a lot of the immigrant characters feel like, well, we came to this country because our parents came from countries with a lot of difficulties, China during the Mao's revolution, Cultural Revolution, the Korean Civil War, Russia after Hitler and Stalin. They brought us here, but things are now as bad as in the countries that they left.
Yeah.
So this was something that I considered quite a bit, and a lot of the books I've written, like Absurdistan, I make fun of the countries I came from, the Soviet Union, everything that happened after it, Putin, all these, Caspian oil-rich republics. But this feels less funny to me because I'm here and my little son is here, and it's my homeland.
Well,
and I think all of these characters undergo that epiphany.
Yeah, that's a deep point. A diaspora community can flee something only to find it in the new frontier. I got 45 seconds. I want to ask you as an artist how you feel about some of the attacks on free speech and the arts. On the right, there's a school district trying to strip, critical race theory and The Handmaid's Tale. Over at MIT, they disinvited a scientist who had criticized affirmative action. Quite a stance for a free-thinking institution to take. Do you worry about this in America now, or do you think the concerns are overblown?
Oh, of course, this is so worrisome. I mean, this is exactly what I grew up with in the Soviet Union. If you can get rid of Toni Morrison's Beloved, then anything can happen. Any work of art can go, because that is one of the most empathic books ever written. And any American who doesn't read books like that is ignoring such a huge chunk of the American experience. To do that to kids is a crime. It's child abuse.
Strongly put. Gary Steingard, I told viewers I was excited for you to be here, which I am. So thanks for coming by.